Yeah, I'm grateful to be here today. My name's AJ Richards from southern Utah. My family are six generations of ranchers. They homesteaded the Arizona Strip in 1916 with horse-drawn wagons and staked their claim in the desert. It was some of the last 48 available for homesteading in our nation. But I am the city slicker cousin. I am not a rancher. I don't own a cow to my name. I grew up doing the cattle drives and the brandings. I hated being teased as the city slicker cousin by my other cousins. It just drove me nuts. It was their way to dig at me. But it's been a blessing because it's given me the ability to see both the side of the urban and the rural and bring the two together. So like I said, I grew up in southern Utah doing those cattle drives and brandings. And my uncle told me when I was younger, if you want to be a millionaire rancher, start with 10 and you'll lose it all. And so I spent my young adult life trying to do that so I could go buy a ranch because that's where I felt like I belonged. But in that process, I got introduced to regenerative agriculture. And I saw that as something absolutely needed, especially where we're from in the desert West, Utah, Wyoming, all of these areas, Nevada, Arizona. And so I started doing a lot of research on that, and we ended up buying a piece of ground in the desert of Utah called the Escalante Desert. And I just had this feeling like we wouldn't have settled here if there weren't the resources for the people. And so what it looks like today couldn't be what it looked like long ago. And I found this old journal from Father Escalante from the Escalante Catholic Party that moved through there in the 1700s, right there in the Escalante Desert, which then was called the Escalante Valley. And he said, we have never seen more beautiful, lush grassland in all of our travels than right here in the Escalante Valley. And now it's desert. So we had this feeling that we could change that. Now, as I started going down that path of trying to convince my generational family to move into regenerative agriculture, I learned this saying that you're always seven to your relatives, which means they're not going to listen to me. I didn't grow up with them on the ranch just doing the cattle drives and the brandings. And so I started kind of ruminating on this thought of how do we influence and encourage that transition? And like both Juan and Jason have said, carrot or stick. And when you're talking about producers, we have the stability in our nation. We didn't get railroaded by what happened in the last 4 years with the COVID because we had people that were willing to stand up against things they didn't believe in. So the stick doesn't work very good because then you're met on the other end with a bigger stick or another stick. In fact, my family are the Bundy Ranchers. And if you know who they are, try bringing a stick and they're going to bring 10 more. And so I started looking at how do we influence and encourage this from the perspective of using the carrot. And what that means is they need access to capital. They need a market that's going to support them. Because the transition to regenerative agriculture, first, it's a psychological transition. And then there's the financial transition and time transition. You can't go from old school traditional producing in the way we know it straight into regenerative agriculture and expect a result the next year. In fact, it takes 5 years or so to start seeing the fruits of that labor, and there's a capital intensive cost in making that transition. And so to expect as consumers, because we hear this fancy buzzword, not knowing the details involved, let's just make the switch real quick. Why aren't our ranchers doing this? And it's because there's a lot more to it. And the reality is the consumer has all the power. We do. And it's in where we spend our dollars. And so that's what I discovered in learning from other folks that have been on this regenerative journey for a while. And in fact, somebody turned out to be related to me. His name's Neil Spackman, and he did the Al-Baida project in Saudi Arabia. And in that process, what he learned was the reason that, the next step of his process was going into restoring mangroves along coastal lines. But what he learned in all of his experience was unless you fix the economics of the people in those areas, you can't go plant mangroves and expect them to thrive because they're going to cut them down, use them for firewood and sell for firewood because they don't have the economic stability. So you have to think about it from this big picture, full ecosystem concept in order to make these changes. And for us, we started from the farm because we figured if we can help people shake the hand that feeds them, bring the consumers to the producers, that shows stability in the market so they now have these direct relationships. They become price makers, not price takers, and they can start making different decisions as they go. So the market, the land follows the market. If we want to see these changes, we've got to start supporting directly those that are working to make these changes. So change requires a buyer. If you have no buyer, there's no new farms. And primarily, we're talking about bringing new farmers in. We're down to 1.8 million farms in America. 86% of them, according to USDA, are considered small. Small means they make $350,000 in gross revenue a year or less. They're the vast majority of our producers, and they don't make enough money to stay on the farm. They all have off-farm jobs, and they keep the farm going because of primarily heritage or that connection to the land. So we've got to bring consumers to the producers so that they have a reason to make these transitions, and that is in our power. Otherwise, what are they going to do? They're going to sell it to a land developer because the next generation doesn't want to take it over. They've seen the struggles between the markets and the politics, and they don't want to do it. And so dad's ready to go, or dad dies and hands it over to the kids, and then they sell it off. And if we don't want to see that happen, if we want to maintain our environment for its natural beauty, it's our producers on the land that's going to be the best source to do that. So as an example, White Oaks Pastures, Will Harris, if anybody knows him, he's a good friend of mine, him and his daughter Jenny. And there's a few people on here you can see along with White Oaks. You've got American Rancher Alliance, Digital Pastures, Old Salt Co-op, Fry's Farm, Bellarina Farms. What's happening is they're building a big enough market for themselves, direct to consumer, that it's starting to expand and affect all of the other farms in the community around them. In White Oaks' example, they've rebuilt their entire town. Their town is a town of like 160 people, 3 hours, Bluffton, Georgia, 3 hours outside of Atlanta. And they have started to purchase every home in that town that was dilapidated and abandoned because they need it for employee housing to sustain the operations on their growing business. We should see this happening nationwide. That's how we bring small farm stability back to our nation, but we have to have that market first. So, that's not working anymore, but these are the challenges that we're facing. So that's what we're working on doing, is getting that consumer demand so that we increase the number of small farms. I have this belief that there are plenty of people sitting in a cubicle that hate their life. And if you look at their Instagram feed, it is clear full of farming and ranching and all of the things that get them out into nature. And if we can build an ecosystem, we call ourselves the Airbnb of local food. And we use that term because if you look at what Airbnb did for that market, how many people do you know that have an Airbnb that's making side revenue or has become their entire business because Airbnb created a simple marketplace to connect the consumer with the property owner? If we can do the same thing for small farms, which is what we're attempting to do at From the Farm, then that person sitting in a cubicle, their buddy's going to elbow and be like, hey, have you heard of From the Farm? There are so many people buying food that they need more food growers, and you can actually make a living doing that. That'll give them that path to exit the off-ramp of the commodity market and go direct to consumer, and also bring more small family farms on. Juan mentioned it, I think, earlier, that I believe what we're going to see in the future is a lot more first-generation farmers and ranchers because we've lost our generational producers. Now, your generational producers are probably going to hang on to the largest land mass sizes per family because it's too expensive to buy land as a small farmer. But actually, if you're selling direct to consumer, you don't need a whole lot of land because you've got enough margin taken away from all the middlemen to be able to afford to do what you're doing. And that's our goal. In our platform, we don't take any of the commission off of the sale of food. We've looked at the middleman components and found ways in the logistics and the marketing and all these other aspects where we can bring revenue to the organization while allowing the producer to maintain that full retail dollar. And it's starting to work. We just need to reach the consumers and get them to go somewhere so they can source directly and have that direct connection and relationship. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so that's one of the issues, is the transparency gap. Consumers don't know. They have no idea where their food is coming from. You know, we've been fighting for different things in politics and policy through the food space, and it's kind of a divisive gap depending on what side of the aisle you are on food. Mandatory country of origin labeling is something that I fully believe we should have, because the consumer should know very quickly at a glance when they look at the product on the shelf where it came from. That's a congressional change. But what they did roll out was Product of USA and changing that. Product of USA prior, all they had to do was further process the product. So they ship it over, put it in a new package, and now it's product of USA. The change that just was rolled out a few weeks ago, it now has to be born, raised, and slaughtered to have that label put on it. But if the consumers don't know, then they're not going to be able to go look for that label. So we're working on these different aspects so that the consumers are well informed, they can know where that food is coming from and start making those informed choices. And when that happens, we fully believe that that's going to create the transparency that we need as consumers to know what we're buying, where to buy it, and what it's going to do for our bodies. You can go next slide, please. So this is what we're doing at From the Farm, just bridging that gap, trying to make it simpler. One of the biggest burdens for consumers going direct to consumer is the marketing. Marketing is so burdensome because if you're selling direct to consumer, marketing happens on social media. And I'll tell you, the last place I want to spend my day is on social media, but that's where I live. But it takes so much time. Imagine the lifestyle of a farmer, sun up to sun down, and now you want them to take on the marketing and the sales and the logistics and all of the other aspects to be able to go direct to consumer. We're trying to bridge that gap. Next slide. So these local systems change the equation. Like I said earlier, 86% of the small farms are small. If we can bridge that gap direct, we can cut out all those middle pieces, start restoring our small slaughterhouses throughout the nation so they can process locally and regionally. Here's something that I think is very concerning, and it goes along with what Juan is saying about our instability. We have roughly 30 to 40 slaughterhouses that process 80% of the meat we consume in America. If you remember in 2021, they started limiting what you could buy at the grocery store. That's because one of the largest, JBS, a Brazilian-owned company, got hacked. They were locked out of their system for a week. They had to pay an $11 million ransom to release their software so they could keep processing. So you've got a captivated market that's limiting the access to consumers because we've consolidated. Next slide. So this is the hub and spoke model. The hub is where the consumer and the producer shake hands. And we're looking at all of these spokes around the outside that we can participate in to simplify that process, reduce the financial burden on the producer, earn the commission for the platform so that we can function for them, but prioritize the family farms, because if we don't, as Juan said, we're approaching something that could be very concerning. And we've got a major drought in our nation, and we don't even know the impact that's going to have yet this year. And we're already at the lowest cattle numbers we've had since the 1940s. We've got, I think it was 86 million head of cattle. That's just beef cattle. That's not counting dairy in our whole nation. And when you consider it takes one beef to feed a family of 4 for a year, and we have 320 million Americans to feed, we're not in a good spot. Next slide. So why this brings back the farmers, like I said, when they get that full retail dollar, it now leads to an opportunity for market access that they haven't had in a long time. When that becomes the norm, when the norm is for consumers to go and find the producers growing their food and shake the hand that feeds them, that's what shifts the trajectory of where we're going as America. So my challenge for everybody here is to find your local producer. Put your money where your mouth is, literally. Feed your body and feed your communities and make sure that we have a thriving food system for our children and their children. Otherwise, we will be dependent on foreign nations to feed us. Or we've got enough lab-grown and fake meat processes in the place that, hey, you know, I heard this said really well. The difference between food sovereignty and food security is having something to put in your belly. Food sovereignty is your right to choose what goes in your belly. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is that enough farms give us the opportunity, gives us the sovereignty to say, this is what I want because I have the choice, not this is what I'm eating because there's nothing left. Anyway, thank you guys very much for having me. Check us out from thefarm.org.